I am a strawberry seed, and as you can see, I'm currently sunbathing with my brethren on this outdoor table. Just 10 minutes ago, I was still nestled securely on a ripe red strawberry. Back then, all I knew was that my destiny was to follow the man in the red sweater directly into his stomach, and I wasn't complaining. That's precisely why this strawberry was born, after all. But just as I was preparing to meet my end, I heard him say,
"This one is perfectly red. The seeds are deep black. It might just be viable."
He then took a knife and sliced the berry into thin little pieces, just enough to extract the seeds and a bit of the accompanying fruit flesh. He lined a plate with a few sheets of toilet paper, carefully placed the freshly cut slices on top, and pressed down gently to make them adhere to the paper's surface. Finally, the plate was carried out to the outdoor table, the spot with the most sunshine. So here I am, relaxing in the sun, preparing myself for a journey I never imagined would begin. In case you were wondering about the rest of the strawberry, well, that part is already in his belly. Times are tough, you know, no need to waste anything. After 2 days of sun exposure, I became darker and harder, while the surrounding berry flesh transformed from soft and moist to dry, crispy, and thin like a shell. On the third day, my owner also came out to the garden, carrying a bag of supplies. After checking and confirming that the strawberry seeds were completely dry, Paul took out a clean plate. Using his fingertip, he gently peeled the strawberry seeds off the paper, letting them fall onto the plate. If you're wondering how I know his name is Paul, I overheard him talking to someone, perhaps a neighbor, yesterday. They kept repeating the name Paul. Since I'm all the way out here in the garden, far from the main house, I'll just call him Paul. Paul set the plate of seeds aside and retrieved a medium-sized black plastic pot, about 6 to 8 inches in diameter. He checked the bottom, ensuring there were drainage holes, and then scattered a layer of small stones inside for better water runoff. Next, Paul prepared the potting mix. He poured coconut coir and organic fertilizer into a large container at a 7-to-3 ratio, 70% coir to 30% fertilizer. He also added a teaspoon of antifungal powder to prevent us from rotting, then mixed everything thoroughly. Once the mixture was ready, Paul added the soil to the black pot, pressing it down lightly until the surface was level. He then scattered us across the soil's surface. The sensation of free-falling was truly fantastic. Afterward, he took a watering can with a shower spout and watered gently, making only 2 to 3 laps around the surface to ensure the soil was just moist enough so the water wouldn't wash us away. Done with the watering, Paul pulled out a small stick labeled strawberry and stuck it into the pot. It was mostly for show, but it looked quite professional, and perhaps it would help him remember what he had planted. Finally, he covered the pot's opening with plastic wrap, not just 1 layer, but 2, to lock the moisture into the soil for a long time. After wrapping the plastic film, I heard Paul say that all that was left was to wait for the seeds to germinate. A minimum of 12 days, or up to 30 to 35 days, depending on the seed type. Then he went back inside. I consider myself a highly competitive strawberry seed, so I will try my hardest to germinate as quickly as possible, definitely. In the first few days, there wasn't much change, except that I felt the outer shell around me slowly softening. Around the 7th day, that shell cracked open slightly underneath, and a tiny white radical slowly pushed out, burrowing into the soil to find an anchor. By about the 12th day, when the root was firmly secured, the upper part of my body began to split gently, revealing a minuscule green shoot. I continued to push up, little by little, and by the 18th day, I gathered all my strength and pierced through the surface of the soil. As soon as I sprouted above the ground, my 2 cotyledon leaves immediately opened. Wow, I had become a little strawberry plant. I quickly looked around to see if any other plants had germinated before me. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I was the 7th plant. What a disappointment. 2 days later, Paul came out to the garden to check on us. I heard the rustling sound of plastic, and immediately after, the cling film was removed. The air felt much fresher, By this time, all the seeds had germinated, and I saw Paul grin with delight. But then he just left us there and went back inside. That's it? I thought he would at least take a few pictures to show off his achievement. About a week later, I started growing my first true leaves. They were larger than the cotyledons, with serrated edges. Their green color was also darker than the seed leaves, featuring a slight yellowish mottling in the center along with tiny veins. The next 2 months flew by, and I remained in the shared home with the other strawberry plants. However, the space was now noticeably cramped as we had grown significantly. Our leaves were now thick, dark green, with clearly defined serrated edges shining in the sun. My stem was no longer weak, covered instead by a fine layer of fuzz, making me look much sturdier. The root system underneath also grew denser. Fine white root threads interlaced tightly, clinging firmly to every small particle of soil. Sometimes, when my root threads touched those of another plant, I even felt a bit embarrassed. Fortunately, we didn't have to stay crowded for too long. Early that morning, I spotted Paul from a distance, carrying a bag of tools. He placed the bag on the table and pulled out a stack of plastic pots, which appeared to be the same size as the one he previously used to start us from seeds. These pots also had drainage holes at the bottom, and Paul lined the base with stones. Next, he prepared the soil, half garden soil, the other half organic fertilizer, and a bit of coconut coir to keep the soil loose. He mixed it very thoroughly, then filled the pots and lightly pressed the surface to flatten it. Now I knew Paul was getting ready to give us our own homes. Paul reached into the pot and gently lifted each seedling. When I was lifted up, my roots still clung to a small clod of soil. In my new pot, Paul dug a small hole right in the center, deep enough for my base to fit snugly, about 4 centimeters. He set me in, then gently filled the soil back around me. He was very careful to ensure my crown, the point where the stem meets the roots, remained above the soil, not buried. If the crown gets buried, I could rot, and my life would end right there. Immediately after being placed in my new spot, I felt a stream of cool water spread down to my roots. Paul watered evenly over the soil surface, just enough to moisten the entire pot. The smell of wet earth was truly pleasant. I bet not just me, but some of you also enjoy the scent of wet soil. My pot was then placed in a spot with direct sunlight. Thanks to this, I could get enough sun exposure, 5 to 7 hours a day. Paul also didn't overwater. He only watered when he felt the layer of soil beneath me starting to dry. Each time he watered, he used a small can with a shower spout to avoid washing away the soil around my base. Everything proceeded smoothly, except that Paul was an extremely quiet person. Day after day, the 2 most common phrases I heard from him were just goodbye when he left the house and hello when he returned. He never said a word while watering us. Occasionally, we got to eavesdrop on his music, but his taste wasn't really mine. It wasn't exactly melancholy, but it wasn't cheerful either. Luckily, the universe compensated for my introverted owner by giving him an extroverted neighbor. This neighbor's name is Sam. He introduced himself the very first day he saw our pots of strawberries. Sam is the type of person who starts talking as soon as he reaches the gate. He discusses everything: work, things happening on the street, and all sorts of random nonsense. He talks nonstop, and Paul listens. Sometimes Paul just hums in agreement or gives a thumbs up, yet Sam continues as if they are having a lively conversation. Regardless, thanks to this, my life became much less boring. After just 1 month, I was much taller than before, and my leaf stalks stretched out longer. My leaves grew thicker and larger. Right at the base, a new cluster of young leaves was beginning to sprout, looking small and adorable. It was all thanks to Paul's diligent care. Besides proper watering, Paul regularly fed us mustard cake powder. This powder is pale yellow, fine-grained, dry, and made from the residue of mustard seeds after the oil has been pressed out. Each time he fertilized, Paul measured out exactly half a spoon for each plant. He used his hand to dig a small hole near the edge of the pot, avoiding the base, poured the powder in, and then covered it with soil again. We strawberries absolutely love this powder because it provides nutrition in a slow but steady manner, helps keep the soil loose and retain moisture well, and also inhibits unpleasant things in the soil, like fungal diseases or pests. However, we weren't fed every day. Paul only fertilized every 18 to 20 days, because if too much is applied, my roots would get hot, which can easily cause root burn, and that would definitely not be fun anymore. After these feedings, I felt as if I had been power buffed. New leaves sprouted and layered themselves one on top of the other. At the same time, new clusters of young leaves also raced to emerge from the center of the base. Not long after, from the crown at the center of my base, I started sprouting my first flower stalks. At first, I thought they were just new leaves, but looking closely, these stalks were smaller and more slender than the leaf stems, reaching straight up, with a green bud perched atop each one. Alongside my growth, I started noticing small side shoots creeping horizontally outwards. I was happy, thinking I was developing vigorously enough to produce extra growth. But gradually, I felt something was wrong. My flower buds were growing very slowly, and I constantly felt like no matter how much I ate, it wasn't enough. I didn't understand where the nutrients were going, and luckily, I had Paul. As soon as he noticed the problem, Paul quickly snipped off those small side shoots. I felt a slight twinge, but once it was done, I felt instantly lighter. It turned out these stolen shoots diverted all the nutrients to nurture the new plantlets, starving the flower buds and keeping them tiny, preventing them from opening. A few days later, my flower buds grew larger and rounder. The tip of one bud slightly separated, revealing a pale white layer inside. Then, one morning, the first bud opened. The white petals gently unfolded, highlighting a cluster of bright yellow stamens in the center. As always, Paul didn't show much emotion, but he still smiled at us. As for Sam, there's no need to say. He had to come over several times a day, just to admire the flowers. Sam even offered to take one plant home to grow himself, but Paul shook his head. Paul reminded him of his track record from a month ago. A neglected snake plant pot, which was still alive, had managed to die under Sam's care. Sam just scratched his head and chuckled. When my flowers, and those of my brethren, had all bloomed beautifully, I knew I needed to prepare myself for the pollination stage and eventual fruiting. That day, I saw a swarm of honeybees flying into the garden from a distance. One by one, they circled the strawberry pots, diligently working. Each plant had about 4 or 5 flowers, so it took quite a while until a bee arrived at my spot. Everything was progressing normally until the clock struck 12 and the bee was pollinating the last of my flowers. But then it froze mid-air, hovering down to say,
"It's lunchtime. I have to go eat."
I tried to persuade it. "Can you just finish up for me? It's only a little bit more." The bee shook its head.
"Sorry, but this is the rule. We don't work overtime. I'll be back in an hour."
With that, it turned and flew away. I knew these bees were disciplined, but I didn't realize they were that disciplined. Still, I figured that flower was already partially pollinated anyway, so it should be fine. A few days later, the petals began to dry up and fall off. Right where the flower once bloomed, tiny green nodes started to emerge. Those were our first baby strawberries. At this stage, they all looked identical: miniature, firm, pale green, and completely unremarkable. Then, day by day, those green berries grew larger. The green color deepened and then faded, turning to an off-white. It was at this point that the shape of each fruit began to take clear form. My first 3 berries were round, evenly tapered, and looked very neat. However, the last one, the one that was pollinated last, was not nearly as round. I looked at it and felt a bad premonition. Soon after, from the creamy white skin, patches of pale pink began to spread. A little bit each day. The red color extended from the tip down toward the stem. When the berries finally turned a vibrant red, I saw the problem clearly. I had 4 fruits. 3 were brightly red and perfectly shaped, but the remaining one was still red, yet its shape was distorted, wide and flat, not slender like the others. The very next day, Paul appeared with a basket and a pair of scissors in hand for the harvest. Of course, Sam was also present. It wasn't until Paul harvested the berries from my plant that Sam wondered if this plant had been sprayed with growth hormones, asking why the fruit was so deformed. Paul narrowed his eyes at Sam and explained that the uneven pollination caused the strange shape. So that was it. I was so mad at that bee. It was all its fault. But when I looked into the basket and saw my mutated berry standing out so clearly, I suddenly thought this berry was pretty cool after all. Paul and Sam carried the basket of freshly harvested strawberries into the house. They talked about something that I couldn't clearly hear, but soon after, they left the house with a small box of berries and a bouquet of flowers. They returned in the afternoon. Paul came over to where we were, sat down, and began to tell us a story. He said that today he took the strawberries to visit an old friend, whose name was Paul. I started feeling confused. Visiting Paul? So he wasn't Paul? He then took out an old photo from his pocket, gazing at it as he spoke to us. The photo showed a golden retriever with golden fur and bright, gentle eyes. He told us that this was Paul, the dog who had lived with him 5 years ago. Last year, the dog passed away in a car accident. This Paul used to love eating strawberries. That's why he was so motivated to grow them. After speaking, he remained pensive for a moment, then watered us. So that's the story. But there is still one more question. What is this man's actual name? Perhaps I'll have to listen around more. Or maybe I'll have to wait until my next life, when I'm human, to finally ask. I am a strawberry, and this is the story of my life.